Hello, this is DC Hammer. Welcome to the DC Hammer Show, where we air live broadcasts Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time. Welcome to the DC Hammer Show, where we air live broadcasts Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock Eastern. So today's co-host will be Arrow, and we may be joined later on in the broadcast by John Adams. Go ahead, Arrow.
Hi, just saying, hey, I'm seeing if I'm coming through. I think loud and clear out here.
Loud and clear. So here we go. So, China, in the ultimate act of projection, meaning accusing others of your own wrongdoing. It's a tactic that's turned into from an art form to a science by the likes of John Mohammed Brennan, Hillary Fraud Queen Clinton et al. China tells the United States to end its provocative, this is the allegation by the Red Chinese, the provocative, unlawful moves in the South China Sea. So the layers of irony, hypocrisy, and projection are just stack up on top of each other with this one. You've got communist China that has taken numerous provocative and aggressive actions to threaten the entire South China Sea area. And when finally checked on its path to dominate and overwhelm the entire region, they immediately lash out to falsely accuse the United States of doing what the commies have been doing for years. So once again, the Red Dragon is spewing fire, and I believe that President Trump has the fire extinguisher. So let's let the commies cry foul if they choose, while we defend our allies and legitimately promote our interests in that area.
The first of whom, hopefully, is Taiwan, among others.
Absolutely, but the gall of the Red Chinese to accuse the United States of illegally, unlawfully, illegally, whichever word you want to use, taking action in the South China Sea by having some of our military vessels present in that area, while the Red Chinese for years have been doing their island building program that I highlighted on the show yesterday, where they've created this mischief reef, where they've dumped a bunch of dirt and boulders into the ocean to create these staging platforms for satellite connections, for military bases, for rocket launch platforms. And somehow, with us showing a presence in that area, in order to indicate to our allies in the area, the Philippines and other free, peaceful nations in that area, that we will be there for them if the provocation by the Red Chinese continues, just to have the communist Chinese come out and turn the finger towards us, pointing at us to say that we are brutes and we are for years now doing things in that area that actually creates the situation of aggression and turmoil, when in fact, as this article points out that comes to us from China News, for several years now China has been locked in a quote-unquote dispute with its neighbors, including Vietnam, the Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Taiwan. They have quote-unquote competing claims in the strategic waterways. But if you remember from what I showed on the screen yesterday, I should have put the Google map up here one more time. Let me see if it's still preserved from yesterday. No, I can't get to it. That's okay. Bottom line is, the area that they call dispute, where they're putting in these islands, the Red Chinese, is not right off the coast of communist China. It is, in fact, right off the coast of Indonesia, and within striking distance of places that I listed, including the Philippines. So the Chinese, the Red Chinese, the Red Dragon can continue to wag its tail to spew out the fire, but I think President Trump has the fire extinguisher. And we'll just see how this continues to go. But bottom line is, the United States has the ability to navigate its ships in the in the free waters of the world, the same as any other country, and our presence there does not mean a threat to the area. It's the exact opposite. It's actually a reassurance to our neighbors in that area that we are there for them, and even though they've created these artificial military bases on these artificial land masses in that waterway in the South China Sea, and they've been reinforcing them and arming them with military equipment, soon as we try to do something to reverse that provocation, to demonstrate to the Chinese and to the world that we are not going to put up with what they are doing, then they turn around and accuse us of aggression. The hypocrisy and irony is just beyond description.
Yeah, I'm picturing something like, in the Wild West, when the bully comes into town and tells the sheriff this town ain't big enough for the both of us, and who is the bad guy there? Well, it's not the guy that's trying to keep the peace. And when you say President Trump has the fire extinguisher, to me that means he has healthy relations with the leaders in the surround of governments in the surrounding area, and he's showing them that he will protect them from the bully, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and as this article points out, the freedom of navigation, we've had exercises going on in that area for the last 12 months. Yes, they become more frequent, and we've been sending in larger vessels, but that's only because the Chinese don't back off from what they're doing with these crazy island building provocations that they are doing, and putting their launch platforms, rocket launch platforms, within striking distance of our allies. So the Red Dragon can wag its tail and spit its fire all it wants, but we are taking Donald Trump and his administration is taking appropriate action in order to offset the militarization that's going on. That's not sponsored. It's actually the action taken by China. And we are not threatening to do anything. They're the ones that are posing. The Red Chinese are the one that's posing the threat. We are merely showing them that we do have the will and resolve to counteract anything they do if they decide to up it one more stage and actually place rockets or something else, that missiles that are aimed at our neighbors in that area in a way that would cause concerned there actually might be a launch, even would it be intentional or unintentional, that could actually take out people in cities in some of our allied nations over there. And so moving on, we've got in the EU, in the European Union, this is interesting. Errol pointed me towards this morning. I had not heard about this at all. So you have to go back, and I would kind of label this one as we take a look at it. This is kind of the EU has fallen. As in the aftermath of London has fallen, President Trump has downgraded the European Union's delegation's diplomatic status from member state to international organization. So the State Department in the United States has these tiered schedules for diplomats and how they rank one to another. It's kind of a however you want to call it, ranking by importance, ranking by affiliation, whatever you want to, the term you want to put on it. But there is a ranking of nations, of the foreign nation states, based on this list of how they fall in a priority order for diplomatic status. And international organization is one step below member state. So I'm sorry. Yeah, correct. And so what they've done is the Trump administration has downgraded them as an ally, and to add a well-deserved insult to their self-inflicted injury, the State Department didn't even bother to inform the EU about this demotion. And I guess the way that this surfaced is that they've been scratching their heads, apparently, the leaders, these diplomats from the European Union that come and go, have been scratching their heads as they stopped receiving invitations to parties and other official functions. And although they're kind of slow on the uptake, the EU diplomat attending the state funeral for Bush 43 was called to pay his respects, pay his respects dead last, pun intended. In other words, there were 150 foreign diplomats that were allowed during that ceremony for Bush 41. No, I'm sorry. I had said Bush 43 a minute ago. I meant Bush 41. Sorry. So they were coming to Washington to pay respects for Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, who had passed away. 150 foreign diplomats were allowed during that ceremony to pay their respects. They were brought through the process in a particular order, and of the 150 foreign diplomats that appeared and were put in this, whatever you want to call it, as some kind of a priority order to appear and to pay their respects, the EU came in dead last. Once again, pun intended. So a State Department official later said that they forgot to tell the EU that this had taken place, that their status had been downgraded. But I just have to think that when you think of what took place when President Trump visited Europe and was in France and went to the sites to commemorate the fallen soldiers that we sent over to Europe to combat the Nazis during World War II and to prevent France and other nations from falling into communism or Nazism and fascism, but instead are free to this day. I think that this is one of those, you kick dirt in my face and you're going to get some dirt back at you. And so since Macron of France disrespected President Trump on his trip to Europe and has apparently forgotten the sacrifices of our military in order to ensure that they'd be free, we are not forgetting how that then puts the EU and the nation states that are involved in the EU in the proper one step lower the diplomatic status that they were a few months ago.
Yeah, DC, I think this is a really actually strategically critical thing that they've done there. President Trump is affirming the correct status of nationalism as being the preeminent global force, and that you aggregate nations together, that isn't a higher entity than the individual nations, it's a lower entity. And that's how we have to think about the world. That's the way the world has been organized. That's the correct legal way that nations have been ordered. They've been autonomous. They've been sovereign. The EU is an attempt to create a supra-sovereign entity, and it's falling on its face because it has to, because it doesn't have true sovereignty. It's tried to usurp the sovereignty of other nations. And so, yeah, Macron is the so-called leader of France, but he's really a Rothschild puppet who has been given the task of trying to steer France into losing its sovereignty and to the unelected bureaucracy of the European Union. And the people in France are definitely upset about it and witness all the yellow vests protests. So I think President Trump is saying our international relations will order themselves according to the way the world is really ordered and not according to the way that the EU bureaucrats want it to be.
Right. And when you talk about reality versus fantasy, coming over to this side of the pond, as most people know, I'm hoping that everybody in this audience paid attention and watched the address that President Trump delivered from the Oval Office last night on the crisis on border security. And as he delivered that address, he clarified all of the points that need to be addressed in order for us to truly secure our borders. He talked about the funding for the border wall. He talked about a variety of other issues related to the immigration system that we have here in this country, the challenges that the customs and border control agents address on a daily basis, what they're faced with and what they have to go through. He talked in very clear and simple terms about the need for legislation to be passed to fully fund what's the remaining pieces of the wall that need to be built. That mere $5.7 billion that's required, and I know when you start with a word like billion, it doesn't sound like mere, but compared to the money we send overseas and we dedicate to other causes, we give to all of the left-wing desires, all of the, like Planned Parenthood and all these other organizations that fulfill what the Democrats want done. When we want something to secure the entire country, Democrat, Republican, left, right, doesn't matter, all citizens of this country to be protected, then they dig their feet in because they're not going to do one thing that will enable President Trump to actually accomplish something that he has promised to the American people if they can get away with it. But as we continue down this road, we're getting to the end strokes here. We're pitching up onto the green right now, and it's going to be a short putt for President Trump to put the ball in the cup, and that would be by he has now invited these representatives from Congress to meet with him today and to try to hash out an agreement on this looming budget crisis, the shutdown of the government that is not going to be reopened as long as there is not funding in there for border wall security and a redo of the immigration system. But the Democrats are digging their heels in and saying they're not going to go along with it. So they are fully willing to go along with illegal immigration on the southern border for the drug trafficking, the human trafficking, the child trafficking, the increase in crime that has taken place in this country over the last several years and decades due to the illegal migration of people up through the southern border. The Democrats are fully willing to put up with that as long as when they get here they become Democrats on the voter rolls. And that's the whole, my opinion, that's the whole purpose. There's two prongs to the Democrat attack against the border wall and changing the immigration system. One is to have everything done their way, and they will never negotiate in good faith with the other side of the aisle ever, and they never have and they never will. That's number one. And number two is they don't want Trump to get that. It actually becomes three prongs. Three-pronged devil thing, pitchfork. They don't want Donald Trump to have a feather in his hat for fulfilling a promise that he made during the campaign cycle. And number three is they desperately need to replace voters in this country that vote legally and don't vote for them with voters of any kind, legal or illegal, that will vote for Democrats, that will ensure that the left stays in power. That is the purpose of what is going on the Democrat side of the aisle.
Yeah, they are working for the triumph of ignorance over informed voters who understand the Constitution and don't want to turn us into a third world Venezuela, which is their goal. They want to sit on top of a pile of rubble, and the alternative is to lift us all up, which is what America's supposed to be about. So I was actually, I'm not sure what meeting exactly you were referring to, DC, but I noticed that right before we went live, there was a meeting that President Trump has already tweeted about that he actually walked out of. He says in a tweet, President Trump, just before we went live, or at least I saw it shortly before, President Trump said, I asked Nancy Pelosi, what can I expect if I reopen the government, and will you put the wall funding on the fast track? And she said no, and he walked out. Okay. So that's where we are right now.
All right, so he threw down the gauntlet last night. He's on the precipice, as far as I'm concerned, in order to declare a national emergency and take the action of taking money out of the defense budget, using the Army Corps of Engineers, the White Castles, and using them in order to build the wall. He was giving them, in my opinion, and I know there were some people on the right that were very disappointed with President Trump last night that he didn't use that opportunity before the American nation to declare the national emergency. But it's my belief that he was giving the Democrats one last chance to actually come forward and negotiate in good faith and to try to do something to hammer this out through the normal legislative process. And from what Arrow you just informed me of with that recent tweet from Donald Trump, they have, as they always do, they've tried to pull the football out in front of Charlie Brown, and it's not going to work this time because Charlie Brown has not fallen for that. And I believe that the next step will be the declaration of a national state of emergency, setting the stage for exactly what I talked about, using the defense budget and our military labor in order to construct that necessary border wall. But, you shouldn't be surprised at the outcome of what Arrow is just bringing to our attention when last night they demanded, the left demanded, the deep state, here's the deep state, they demanded to have equal time to be able to respond to whatever President Trump was stating. And boy, did that become exactly how this is captioned, a creep show.
Yeah, this is amazing how this is all played out. I think President Trump had amazing optics on this, and the big takeaway from us, because we had a couple of dinner guests and we weren't paying full attention after the president's speech to the Pelosi and Schumer show, but they came off amazingly horrible. The American Gothic stereotype. And I think you have a picture of that, don't you, DC?
I do. I prepared a little graphic here that is my take on the American Gothic portrayal. So, you know, Grant Wood was the painter that created this American masterpiece, the American Gothic. And now I believe that we've got a new American Gothic, as shown in that photo that was shown on Fox News and some other outlets. That came to us through the Gateway Pundit. And I believe he's rolling in his grave as that masterpiece of Americana art has now been supplanted, replaced, or is trying to be replaced, by this surreal and demonic image of the Democrat leaders of the 2019 Congress. And there they are in all their force. All they would need is a pitchfork and maybe some pointy ears, and that would be a perfect representation of where we are on the left.
Absolutely, and there wasn't actually a picture of the behind with the flags behind them and garb put on them to make them resemble the photo with basically the face of Schumer and the face of Nancy Pelosi in that original picture with the flags behind, and that was all over the internet not long after that ended. So President Trump is the master of managing a two-front war, and the way that I see this war is there's a war in the media, in the mainstream media, which is the enemy of the American people, as President Trump says, and that's where this what we're talking about now played out. But there's also the war in the bureaucracy, and that's what we're talking about with the declaration of a national emergency. And President Trump, as DZ pointed out, held off on the his move on that front in order to first win the war in public opinion. And I think it's all going to plan. I think it's going beautifully.
And absolutely. And talking about opinion, public opinion, of course, the Marxist screaming media immediately came out after President Trump's speech from the Oval Office and the rebuttal from the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, indicating that the American public is fully behind Nancy and Chucky and is disagreeing with President Trump about the importance of the border wall. But I would think that it'd be important for anybody that's on the fence about this, pun intended once again, and I don't think that as many people in these quote-unquote fake news polls truly are on that side of the fence. I would think the vast majority of Americans, I would say up to 70%, are in favor of securing our border. And Breitbart put out a piece that covered the facts. So you can ignore the polls, in my opinion, because things are going to... My opinion is, once again, that there will be a wall, that President Trump, one way or another, is going to get it done. As the wall goes into place and as this controversy over the funding for it and getting the border wall up dissipates, and the people see the differences in what takes place as far as the reduction in crime, the reduction in the inflow of drugs, I think that the facts themselves and the human cost that we're dealing with here, when we have to spend so many resources, both human and monetary, in order to protect ourselves and to deal with the aftermath of open borders, I believe that this entire process, this entire situation, what led up to the border wall actually being constructed and a new immigration system being implemented, will go into the background as we then stop and turn around everything that has led to these kind of statistics. 5,000 people of the illegal aliens that have come in during the previous period are convicted sex offenders, not just convicted offenders. These are people that have been put in prison. This is just the subcategory of sex offenders. 5,000. You've got 1,600 plus more that are murderers. You've got another almost 2,000 that have been arrested for sex offenses against them, while 300 against other illegal aliens. So while 387 illegal aliens have pending murder charges against them. This is the volume of crimes, the number of American citizens that have been affected, the number of mothers without children now that they've been murdered by illegal aliens, the number of people that have died from opioid and heroin addiction, the amount of traffic that continues to go across the border until we fully secure it, flooding the border with heroin and drugs. It's beyond belief. You can, as this article indicates, that more Americans will die from drugs this year that were killed in the entire Vietnam War. That was almost, there were 60,000, 55, I believe, thousand troops that were killed in Vietnam, American troops that died, and you've got almost that same number that are dying on an annual basis in this country because of overdoses of heroin and fentanyl. And so how can you possibly defend this?
President Trump, yeah, that was just blew me away, and I'm so glad President Trump included that information in his speech.
And when you take a look at the number of homicides in Mexico, I mean, this just doesn't affect the United States. This whole process, the open border, the movement of these people, the involvement of opening free traffic lanes for the drug cartels, it's turned countries like Mexico into Mexico now is a giant cartel. It is run by the drug lords. It is the honest police and judges throughout the entire country of Mexico have pretty much been purged. They've been.
I agree with you, DC. Yeah, I think it is that bad. I know that Americans, at least myself, I used to think of where is the drug capital, where they make all the bad stuff. Well, we know way over in the other side of the world there's Afghanistan, but it used to be on this hemisphere, it was Colombia. Well, if you're like me, you kind of get ideas from pop culture, and I watched all of Narcos, and that was really, really interesting and all about the drug trade out of Colombia. Well, they tried to move that show up to Mexico, and the research they were trying to do in order to set up the continuation of the show in season 5 or whatever it would be, the drug lords in Mexico started killing off the people in the show. So they're far more lawless than Colombia.
And the amazing thing is, even with these staggering figures of homicides in Mexico, the number of disappearances can't even be quantified. The gunmen, the cartel hitmen are so prolific, are in every nook and cranny throughout the country of Mexico. On a daily basis, you can stumble across a severed head, a body that's been partially buried, and you can't even put numbers on it. Everything that you're hearing, in my opinion, these numbers, 250,000 homicides in Mexico, 30,000 disappearances, those in my mind are low numbers. Those are just lowball guesstimates, just like the lowball guesstimates that the Marxist screaming media put out about the number of illegal aliens in America. They talk about, 10 or 12 million. No, we're talking 30 to 40 million illegal aliens already in this country, and that needs to be dealt with. And the only way you're going to deal with it is to shut off the spigot, and that is to shut the border, deal with the people that are already here, and prevent the people that shouldn't come here from coming here again in the future. It's the only way out.
And you haven't even mentioned the gun running and the death that is caused, and I know you've been looking into that.
Right, and what I've decided to do, I was thinking about incorporating some of the gun running research into the daily broadcast, but what I've decided to do is to save that for pre-recorded broadcasts that I'll upload to the DC Hammer show. So I'll continue to do these spotlights on the news as the primary basis for the DC Hammer shows on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, 5 o'clock Eastern. But I will do some special reporting on the genesis of the gun running, not just in this country, but worldwide, just to give people a flavor for comparison and so on. But I'll also then deep dive into what's been happening and escalating over the decades as this gun running scheme and the connection that it has to drugs, to human trafficking, to the sex trade. All of those, these are all tentacles of the same giant deep state octopus. And I would believe that as soon as we shut the border, we will chop one of the most deadly tentacles from that octopus, and then the other tentacles we can cut off one at a time after that. But the main one is to get this silly wall that we've been fighting about for all these years and months built. And if you want some reasoning for why to do that, if you just listen to some of the stories by some of the families that have been affected by this influx of illegal aliens over all these decades, the families that have lost loved ones, And I talked yesterday about the Angel Moms and how, well, this is primarily an organization that started. It became a support group created by a few people that had lost loved ones due to illegal aliens killing their children. But it has grown beyond that and is now a national effort with these people coming together, these strong women and other men attached to supporting the cause. You've got Craig Sawman Sawyer out there fighting a lot what's going on with the sex trafficking and everything what's happening to the kids and a lot of the the alien connection to that. But then you've got this angel wife Ruth Martin. This is on a Breitbart piece that comes out that's talking about how the Democrats want to quote unquote sweep the loss of American lives under the rug. And there's another picture, a more positive picture of Chuck and Nancy. But what angel wife Ruth Martin is saying is that they are avoiding even talking about the consequences of illegal immigration and attempting to shift the narrative to some kind of a political power play by President Trump. Chuck Schumer saying that all that President Trump was doing was having a temper tantrum last night instead of clearly in a calm, rational way trying to bring the truth to people. And what she was saying, this Angel Mom was talking about, is she just wanted to go back. She just, in this article, and when she was talking to whomever at Breitbart or whoever the news agency was that she's talking about, how Donald Trump referred to them, to the Angel Moms, remembering holding their hands. He said this in his speech last night, remembering talking to us. And she says, President Trump, we remember you. He sat across from us. He listened to our stories. He heard our cries. He watched our tears roll down our faces. This man truly cares. He's trying to do everything in his power to secure our borders, but we have a Democrat Party that's more concerned and focused on impeaching this great president. That's the core of it. That's the nut of it. She's exactly right. And for anybody, I'm sure that immediately after President Trump gave that speech last night, I'm sure that people on the left were fact-checking until their fingers were, worn to the bone on their keypads to try to find, some kind of a counter that President Trump actually did not meet with the families of these people that have lost loved ones to illegal alien crime. But they can't do it because you've got the mom like this who President Trump met with her and met with other of the Angel Moms. So there's no way that the Marxist screaming media can counter the fact that President Trump cares and he's fulfilling his promise any way he can.
He's not a politician. And I think at some gut level, Americans know that. And they know that he's not playing games. They know that he's not part of the swamp. I see the people on the left try to paint him as such. But I think Americans see that this is a real human being that only became president because he actually wanted to represent the people, and that the Uniparty, not just Democrats, but the establishment Republicans that have this basically con game going that is contrary to the wishes of the American people. All these things that fuel crime that are allowed by the party in Washington, that is, they get kickbacks one way or the other. That advances the agenda that is wanted by the deep state. They want to collapse the government so that we could become a part of some world government and the UN troops would come in, or whatever form that takes. These people have been selling out America and have figured out a way to get rich doing it. And President Trump is doing the opposite. And I think the American people see it.
And unfortunately, President Trump and the others, the Angel Moms and the people that really want law and order, would prefer for our citizens, daughters and sons and husbands and wives to not be murdered by the illegal alien criminals that are coming into the country. That there's a push now in the state of California, unfortunately, to actually go further than former Governor Jerry Brown had made it by designating California as a sanctuary state. And with new Governor Gavin Newsom being sworn in the other day, he doubled down on allowing anybody to come into California, regardless of whether it's legal or not. And at the same time, we're just coming off of the funeral of police officer Ronald Singh. And it's interesting, Martin, one of these angel moms, attended his funeral. The guy was only 33 years old. He was murdered by an illegal alien the day after Christmas. A young father removed from his family by being murdered by an illegal alien. And Gavin Newsom and Jerry Brown have had the audacity to say that that death has nothing to do with California being a sanctuary state or allowing illegal immigration to come in over the border. How anybody can say that with a straight face, and I'd like to hear him say that to Ronald Singh's widow and see how she reacts to that statement.
It's mind-blowing, DC, the level of blindness or hypocrisy, however you want to label it, of these people like Newsom, who's I long suspected he's going to be far worse than Governor Moonbeam, Jerry Brown. But they don't even really acknowledge any difference between illegal and legal immigration. It's like they think that that sneaking into the country by going around controlled borders is somehow just fine, that there's nothing illegal about it. There's a famous meme that I've seen all over Twitter where Nancy Pelosi says illegal immigrants may not be committing crimes. It's like she doesn't even acknowledge that they're breaking crimes by being here illegally. It's like I say, it's just mind-blowing, the fact that these people don't even see what they're saying or advocating.
Right, and I understand the human cry on the left for protecting the interests of all humans on the planet, including those folks who have decided to join these movements, these invasion forces coming from the South. But in a previous broadcast, I made this statement, and I'll repeat it again today. Let's say there were some innocent moms and children that were involved in the formation of that quote-unquote caravan as it was leaving Honduras. As it proceeded north through the other Central American states and got into Mexico, along the way, this is days worth of activity, and these people that are in the caravan, whether they are innocents or they are terrorists or drug dealers or gang members or whatever, they all brush up against each other, and everybody soon learns who is in that caravan with them. And you can't tell me that there was an innocent person in that caravan who didn't quickly realize that there were hundreds, if not thousands, in this caravan of people who were criminals, were drug dealers, were human traffickers. Come up with the crime, there was somebody in there that represented it. And at that point in time, let's say you're halfway up through Mexico, you're on your way to the border, you thought it was a good idea, you were perfectly innocent to begin with, but now you are washed with all of that criminal behavior. You are now elbow to elbow with the criminals. You are associating with a criminal. In the United States law system, if you are aiding and abetting a criminal, if you are associated with crime, you are then liable also as having committed a crime. And in my opinion, they cease being innocent people as soon as they realize that they're on this caravan with others who are illegals, and if they don't immediately stop and turn around and come up with a different way to deal with their situation, if they continue on, if they say, that's okay, I'm going to hang out with the terrorists, I'm going to hang out with the gang members, I'm going to hang out with the drug cartels, they become a part of it. They may not be the people that is going to pull a trigger or bring a bag of cocaine across the border, but they're standing elbow to elbow with those people. And I'm sorry, I lose my compassion for those folks, and I will save my compassion for Mrs. Martin and others who have lost their children because they've been murdered by those same illegal criminals that are on their way up to once again try to jump over the border.
Yeah, DC, and as you were describing that, I couldn't help but think of diseases, which you haven't even mentioned explicitly, but these people moving up through these caravans are carrying diseases, and I believe that that's a big component of the danger to Americans is diseases that were virtually eradicated are now coming back.
And also brought up in this piece by Breitbart is the fact that don't think that this is just a recent phenomenon. This has been going on for decades, and it highlights the issue of, or the situation of El Monte police officer Don Johnston, who we're talking now 28 years ago, responded to a call from a local bank about a man that was attempting to cash a forged check, and he shielded a civilian in the line of fire from this criminal, and he was shot in the neck by the illegal alien and was paralyzed. He then was paralyzed for the next 12 years and finally succumbed to the fact that he had been shot in the neck and paralyzed 12 years earlier. And for anybody to then say that we shouldn't try to do something substantive, something dramatic, build the wall and do more things in order to prevent these kinds of crimes, these kinds of tragedies from happening over and over again is just beyond belief, but that's unfortunately the state of affairs we are right now, as long as we have this deluded left Democrat Party that is willing to drive us all over the cliff just for their own political and personal advantage.
Yeah, virtue signaling is a big motive for a lot of these people. I think they actually believe they're on the side of helping the poor, the downtrodden, and think that there's some kind of fulfillment of the Statue of Liberty offering the sanctuary to people, and they don't know what they're doing. It's sad. They need to be educated. Some of them are willful. It's all driven by Trump hatred, though. It's just so sad.
Yeah, and so moving away from the border and coming inside to Washington, D.C., which has its own problems. It's an interesting revelation that's been made. It came out late yesterday that finally, after many false reports over different periods of time, that Dirty Rod Rosenstein, who has been the Deputy Attorney General, who stepped in pretty much to run the Department of Justice, quote-unquote justice, during this 2-year period when Jeff Sessions recused himself from the Russia probe and so on. He is now officially going to leave the Department of Justice, and there's two different thoughts on this. One is whether it will take place within the next couple weeks regardless, or, as some of the articles have referenced it, as he will only leave if and when President Trump has confirmed William Barr to be the next Attorney General, in other words, the next permanent boss, the person to whom Rod Rosenstein would report.
Yeah, you see, I think it's really interesting that he's seems to be not liking Barr, and we don't know a whole lot about him. We know that he served under Bush 41, correct?
Yes, he was appointed by Bush 41.
So there's, that has both pluses and minuses to it. That was probably back in the day when the Department of Justice was really had most of the people actually wanting to bring about a justice that hadn't been as fully subverted as it became under 2 terms of President Obama. So we can presume that he's a good man. However, anybody in my mind that's has Bush loyalties, including Kavanaugh, is somewhat suspect. But I think President Trump is wise in choosing the best of people that have experience and can actually redirect their patriotism in the most beneficial way possible. So I'm hopeful.
I am too, and bye-bye Rod Rosenstein, the sooner the better. And this also then leads me to believe that, and it's also indicated in this RSB, this is from the Right Side Broadcasting Network, what I put up on the screen, that regardless of whether Rosenstein is leaving, because it's imminent that William Barr will be his boss soon, and he's going to get out of Dodge to try to protect himself. I don't think it will protect him, but I one layer of distance between himself and the noose. But what could be happening here as well is this is a signal to all of us that the Mueller investigation is probably winding down. So the person that appointed Robert Mueller as special counsel to begin with, Rod Rosenstein, the person that's protecting him ever since having been put in the post as special counsel, Rod Rosenstein, the person who at certain times has acted as if he understands that he needs to step down, has meetings with President Trump and so on, but then stays there persistent like a tick on the back of a dog, has finally now made it clear that he is leaving. And to me, he is joined at the hip with his best buddy and partner in crime, you put quotes around that, my opinion, Bob Mueller, and this would be an indication that the Mueller probe is going to come to a close, thank God, sooner the better.
Well, you've just reminded me, DC, of what it was that I saw about Barr recently that gave me pause, and that is that he is actually quoted in an article, and I can't remember if it was Gateway Pundit or somebody else, but some source like that, that said that he did not think that Mueller's investigation was a witch hunt and that he would not fire Mueller. This is Bill Barr, so we'll see.
We will see. But the confirmation hearings for William Barr are scheduled to begin in the Senate. Thank God we've got control of the Senate. January 15, I think it'll be a quick process. He's already been confirmed by the Senate previously. There's no way that they can stop it from happening. They can pull their shenanigans. I'm sure that they're going through William Barr's background. They're going through his trash can. They're going through his high school yearbook. They're looking through to try to find baby pictures of William Barr, something that they can hang on him like they tried to do to Brett Kavanaugh during the hearing in order to confirm Brett Kavanaugh as the justice on the Supreme Court. I'm sure that they would try to do the same thing to William Barr, but they will fail. William Barr will be the next Attorney General of the United States, I believe. And as soon as he takes office, then we still have Ezra Cohen Watnick that was sent over there a year and a half ago, who's a white hat that was attached to General Flynn and has been, in my opinion, probably sniffing out everything that needs to be addressed in the Department of Justice, and I would hope that a lot of that activity has been taking place during the interim appointment, the acting Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker, but I would think that it will go forward in full force as soon as William Barr takes his seat as Attorney General of the United States.
Great thoughts, DC. Yeah, but that's my hope as well. I think Whitaker has probably we know the guy's background. We know Whitaker's background. He's a true patriot, and I think he's been doing some effective cleanup. That's rather than a high-profile, name splash or doing some kind of as Q says, kind of a Scaramucci role. I don't know that he's high-profile enough for that. I think he's doing some serious background cleanup, like you just said.
And speaking of cleanup, we've got another announcement that came out from the White House today. And there was a signing ceremony in the White House earlier today, and President Trump participated in a signing ceremony for some anti-human trafficking legislation. And as you remember, go back in time now, December 21, 2017, President Trump put into force an executive order that was against human trafficking and people involved in corruption, and gave the United States government the power to confiscate their assets. And immediately after that, people like Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Alphabet, the parent company of Google, and he will be highlighted as I go through the deep dive into the deep state and highlight things connected to gun running and some other things. His name is going to be mentioned here and there through that study, that research. But anyway, so a lot of people after Eric Schmidt also abandoned their ships, probably to avoid being caught up in that net when they started to impose what was stated in that executive order. That executive order was re-upped, in other words, was restated again in 2018. The one that came out December in 2017 was re-upped in 2018. And now you've got this piece of legislation that was signed during the previous session of Congress that they are now rolling out, and there was a signing ceremony for it today, and there's a couple other things that'll shine a little light on exactly what that's all about. Ivanka Trump tweeted out today that the administration is combating human trafficking in the United States and around the globe. This is not just an American problem. This is everywhere, unfortunately. And so the President of the United States signed today the last of 4 major bipartisan pieces of legislation. Again, that means that it was passed before the January 3rd of 2019, because I don't think you're going to hear the word bipartisan legislation until January of 2021. But anyway, so the bipartisan piece of legislation was passed into law in the recent weeks, which means back in December, to punish perpetrators, protect victims, and prevent these horrific crimes. And here is the piece of paper that's the fact sheet that documents exactly what Ivanka was talking about, and that is that it's President Trump is fighting to eradicate human trafficking. This was issued today. It is now been issued as a fact sheet about exactly what's going to happen. And the highlight for this is that this activity, the human trafficking, is an urgent humanitarian issue, and that the Trump administration is committed to leveraging every resource they have to confronting the threat, to supporting the victims and survivors, and to holding the traffickers accountable for their heinous crimes. And then it goes in to the details of exactly what that means as far as the action to be taken. So, and I agree 100%, and then Arrow, you kick in with whatever you want to talk about on this issue. With human trafficking is equivalent to modern day slavery. What do you think?
Absolutely, and it's you could, I think maybe the best way to think about it from the way the cabal view it is they see it as drugs on steroids. In other words, drugs can only be sold once and used once. Humans can be trafficked over and over again. They're reusable, so they're much more lucrative, and that's obviously it's also a deep perversion of us as children in the image of God. So it's a horrible thing, human trafficking is, and it needs to be fought with the greatest resources that all governments have available. And what we've learned in recent years, and since Trump has become president especially, is that governments throughout the world have been perverting and turning a blind eye, and actually have had satanic elements within them that preyed on these trafficked humans. So it needs to end. And the first thing that has happened already is for the spotlight to be shined on it. And the Democrats and the opposition to President Trump, they don't want that light to be shined. So it's up to us to help people see what's really going on here. And I'm so glad that this is legislation that has been signed into law today. It makes it much more powerful than an executive order. An executive order can come and go with the person that's in the office. If somebody gets in there, God forbid, that wants to again turn a blind eye to human trafficking, well, will have a whole lot more problem now that this is actually codified into law. So this is a very important thing that happened today.
Absolutely. And so today they were signing into law the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, and that tightens up the criteria that countries need to meet in order to eliminate trafficking. But previous to this, back in December, President Trump had signed the Abolish Human Trafficking Act. He did that in December, strengthening the programs that support the survivors and resources for combating modern slavery. And this is interesting with this other piece of legislation, and I love the title that they put on it. This is the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act. Frederick Douglass was a slave before the Civil War, and he was in horrific conditions in the South. And he fought his way through the slavery. He was traded from one plantation to another. He was whipped. He was beaten. Frederick Douglass was treated like a dog, and he survived through it. A brilliant man, very educated. He self-educated himself. He brought himself up from that. When President Lincoln, the Republican president who freed the slaves, and Frederick Douglass became a free man after that. Frederick Douglass spent the rest of his life dedicated to bringing people into the mainstream of life that had been former slaves, and did everything he could in order to not just complain about how he had been treated as a slave, but to, with dignity and intelligence, to take a lot of actions in his own life and to help others so that they could draw themselves out of the conditions that they were in under slavery. And thanks to Republican President Lincoln, after the slaves were freed at the end of the Civil War, Many of them were able to become prosperous business owners. Many of them became members of the Republican Party, and actually there was a black Republican that was elected as the first black person to be a part of the House of Representatives. And all from that point on, the freed blacks aligned themselves with the Republican Party for decades until the actions of the Democrat Party through pushing legislation that created these welfare programs and other ways to dislocate the black families, to make the black families then dependent upon the new plantation state implemented by the Democrat Party. Then what we have again today is we've got the need then to fight slavery all over again under a different name and in a different way. But in my mind, this is slavery 2.0, and I believe that President Trump and what he's doing will free the slaves of the human trafficking organizations, the same as President Lincoln freed the slaves as the wind down to the Civil War took place.
I agree, DC. Everything you just said. It's like what we see throughout history is we solve a problem on one level, and then people begin to take it for granted that that's the way we are. We're advancing as humans, and then there's that same problem on another level, and sometimes it's hard for people to recognize, but that's exactly what the human trafficking is. It's modern slavery, sometimes called white slavery, but it really has nothing to do with the color of the skin. It's just human trafficking, sex trafficking, child trafficking. It perverts the humans from free and independent people. And if anybody wants to doubt that that's what it's about, you go back and read some Frederick Douglass and some of his quotes, or like DC said, he's a brilliant man. He was a brilliant man who really clearly understood the vision of the founders for America. And it is a land in which we are individually united in our stance before our Creator to be all that God created us to be. That's the vision for America. And that vision is undercut every much by human and sex trafficking as it was by slave plantations. It's just a modern form of the same thing, and we have the opportunity to rise up and fight the battle in the realm that we're standing in now. And thank God for President Trump moving that to the forefront.
And if Frederick Douglass were alive today, he would be standing up to volunteer for President Trump to be in the forefront of this entire effort. President Trump now has made it a government-wide effort. It's not just going to be driven through one particular department. This is an initiative that's going to be supported by all areas of the United States government. And he's created a task force to monitor and combat the trafficking. He's taking other actions to ensure that our law enforcement people are doing what they should do to sniff out, to find out, to deal with this. And it's not, again, this is not just a problem in the United States. This is a worldwide problem. The government overlords, the overshadowers of the entire planet, this is part of what they do in order to keep us all under their thumb and under their control, and to make money through it, because this is an extremely lucrative business, moving people from one place to another. I don't see this being too much different than those NGO ships that were being used to transport these illegal aliens from Africa and the Middle East up into the European Union, and being paid thousands of dollars per head for each one of those people. Those, in my mind, they fall into that same category as human traffickers. If you're getting paid to move somebody in this way, and you're doing it across borders, and you're doing it illegally, you are a human trafficker. So just as they tried to paint lipstick on a pig when it came to those NGO ships out in the Mediterranean, moving people from one place to another and getting paid to do it, you've got the same things going on this side. And maybe they don't have to cross water to get there, except for the little trickle of the Rio Grande. But they are still in the same business, and it's all connected. Guns, drugs, people. It's a three-legged stool of evil. It is criminal activity on all levels. It is horrific. It creates pain at all levels with every person that's involved in it. And this is the first president in my lifetime, I'm getting older, that has taken substantive action to deal with it. I pray that he will continue down this path. I don't see anything that leads me to believe that he's going to shy off on this initiative. I believe that he understands exactly how important this is, and he is getting tougher on a daily basis and giving the people in law enforcement and other departments of the government the tools they need in order to turn this exactly around. Because as stated in this fact sheet from the White House, the human trafficking threat is the heinous crime. It's a heinous crime. It's a horrific assault on human dignity that impacts people here in the United States and around the world to the tune of nearly 25 million victims of human trafficking worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely, DC. This is a true turning point in the destiny of mankind. I mean, it really is. We would either descend into the morass of just humans abusing humans and chaos, or we rise up and we overcome this, because it does, in many ways, underline all of the predatory actions of the deep state. A lot of this stuff, this human trafficking, is at the core of a lot of what the dark cabals worldwide has been about for decades. And I'm thinking about they use humans as a source of currency where they're bought and sold. They also use the products of torture, snuff films, adrenochrome. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but this is a big deal, and it's a lot more. There's a lot more depth to it than you see on the surface. It's a lot bigger. We're not overplaying the issue. We're underplaying the issue by even concentrating on what President Trump has already talked about in his speech. It's actually a much bigger issue than even that.
So pray for continued strength for President Trump, for protection, for the people on the border, for our military and law enforcement folks that are stationed down there, for their families. We pray for the people that are involved in human trafficking at any level to if they're actually the ones perpetrating the crimes, for them to repent and turn the other way, and for anybody that's been a victim of this, for their healing, for them to be protected. And we just pray with this action being taken by the Trump administration and enforced through the different agencies of the United States government, as the deep state continues to crumble, as the sewer in Washington, D.C. continues to be drained. I just pray for the protection, God's protection upon us all through this process, but particularly for the angel moms and the others that have suffered through this. To pray for the deep state operatives, our New World Order governing overlords, our black hats everywhere. I pray for them to repent, because their time is running out. The hammer of justice is headed their way. Abandon your leaking ghost ship while you can. Save yourselves from this wicked generation, for we will never surrender. We will never be silenced. We will continue to fight on in God's name. So God bless you all, and we look forward to being with you again tomorrow, 5 o'clock Eastern.
Shine the light of truth. In the end, we'll stand with God.
Amen.